Right, okay. Alright, since we're getting quite a few people joining, it's time to begin, I guess. So on this live stream, I'm going to go through all the power and conflict poems for not all of them. My picks for what power and conflict poems I think I would be best to focus on and really know really well for the exam tomorrow. And then I'm going to go do Lord of the Flies. So anyone who doesn't do Lord of the Flies can check out after the power and conflict poems. My exams have been all right so far. Yeah, I mean, just what was that Macbeth question on the AQA English lit? I don't. But thank you. So let's start off with we're going to start off with London. Okay, so London is by William Blake, and it was written in 1794 at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and the emergence of a clear social class system. And Blake is part of the Romantic movement. And the Romantic movement basically means that they rejected authority and thought that there should be wonder in the world, and this idea that not everything should be controlled, which is definitely seen through this poem, since the key themes would be power, control, the power of industry. And you get that heavily a lot through this poem. So we're going to just go into some key quotes. The first one I'd go for in this poem is the whole repetition of chartered. This is really important because it shows how everything is owned and corporations are taking over. This will get you a structure. This will really get you your AO2 points if you mention this, because you're talking about structure, and that can get you some marks there. And since the environment he is owned, the persona is owned and restricted and controlled, you feel this sense of repression on him from the upper society. And so the repetition of chartered really shows this. You can even go into how Blake mentions how the Thames itself is chartered, and the juxtaposition of having a natural free-flowing river being controlled and owned. The second one I want to go into is marks of weakness, marks of woe. Now here, firstly, you've got a liquid alliteration, which creates this very long-sounding words, which also adds to the misery of this. Blake is showing how the people in London are miserable. They're being dragged down and elongated by this society that they're in, and that basically demonstrates that. The next repetition that we're going to look at is the whole repetition of in every voice and of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every band, the mind forged manacles I hear. So the repetition of every is reinforcing the universality of the situation in the fact that everyone is experiencing it. So it's not just this is not just the effect of power on the individual, but power on society. And that's something that if you're asked to compare to another poem, you could either do contrasting views on how the power affects an individual versus society, or you could pick another poem that shows power of society. Maybe an example of this would be Exposure or Charge of the Light Brigade, would both be good ones for that. Next one is the obvious, really famous one. I actually made a mistake on my notes here and had to use whiteout. But the most famous quote from this poem, mind forged manacles. This demonstrates how the restrictions on people are self-imposed, since people are not challenging the society they live in. The external restrictions imposed by institutions are becoming internalized. So Blake's idea was that people were being accepting. They weren't fighting back against this. And this was one of the main problems in his eyes when it came to the society of London, and how the people weren't fighting back against it, but just accepting it and accepting their reality. And that's something you really get into with that quote. The next one I'd go for is the hapless soldier sigh runs in blood down palace walls. This is Blake criticising institutions and how they don't care about their citizens. So in this quote, he criticises both the army and the government or royal family. So the hapless soldier sigh, it's showing how this is criticism of the whole idea of the soldiers being told what to do and being forced into places, and the whole idea of blood running down palace walls is their lives and their blood is on the government's hands, yet the government doesn't care. And that's what the point Blake's really trying to make here. And you can get your AO2 marks talking about blood and the connotations of the word blood that you can get from that. The next one, the final one actually for this poem is of course the final line in the final line, and the final line is always a great one to use in the poetry exam because it's really easy to compare final lines. It always is, and opening lines and final lines are great comparisons, so know your opening and final lines, that's really important. The final one in this one is marriage hearse, and this is the juxtaposition of celebrations, one out of joy and the other out of sorrow. In Blake's eyes, by putting these two together, he is saying that marriage equals the death of freedom. This institutionalized thing, it equals death. So what Blake's really trying to say here is about how the control that society has over them is what's leading to their death. So that's basically London in a nutshell. Does anyone have any questions on it before we leave? But so that's London. We're going to move on from that. We're actually going to go to a different style of notes now because I did all my others on flashcards. And I've actually heard my English teacher say that London's probably is quite likely to be a named poem. So if we want to talk, if that's a possibility there. So the next one we're going to do is Storm on the Island. Now, Storm on the Island won't be the named poem, so if you're worried about that, don't be, because it came up in a sample paper that AQA gave. So let's start with, but Storm on the Island's really great for comparing power of nature. What does Storm on the Island compare to? Or London, Joe? Well, Storm on the Island compares to the Prelude really well with Power of Nature. It could compare to Bayonet Charge in a similar way, or Exposure. These are all really good ones for Power of Nature. Storm on the Island also because of its metaphor for the Troubles and political unrest. Oh, I'll go over to London in a minute. Because of its political unrest, it could be compared to honestly any poem with political unrest, so London or anything like that. For London, in terms of comparisons, I compare London to Ozymandias. You could possibly compare it to My Lost Duchess. You could compare London to anything with an effect on society, so Exposure would be another one. Charge of the Light Brigade's a really good one to compare London to because of this whole idea of society forcing itself on the citizens, so those would be some good ones for London. If we go to Storm on the Island, let's start. So Storm on the Island, the context for Storm on the Island is it was written by Seamus Heaney in 1966, and Heaney grew up during the political unrest between Catholic and Protestant Ireland, which was also known as the Troubles. The title is a play on words for Stormont in Belfast, which was the centre of political unrest and the seat of the Northern Ireland Assembly. For structure in Storm on the Island, we can look at the fact that it's iambic pentameter, but without unstressed syllables, nearly solving the issues in Ireland, but not quite, is what that kind of represents. So, if anyone wants these notes, I can absolutely send them to you. I've already got them photographed. So the iambic pentameter without unstressed syllables represents that. The fact that it's one stanza is the whole thought of one thought about protecting the island. And the use of present tense suggests that the islanders are doing what they have and always have done to prevent the storm and prepare for it. So this shows this kind of ongoing experience with the use of the present tense. So you flip to the other side. And this is where we have our key quotes for this one. So key quotes for Storm the Island. The first one would be... Oh, sorry about that. The live video got paused. I don't know if it's coming back. Hello. Okay, we continue now because I can actually see what's on the camera. So the second quote for Storm the Island is, "This wizened earth has never troubled us." So this is the whole idea that it really is the nature that they're fighting against in this poem. So they're saying that the earth beneath them has never troubled them. So they're trying to work with it, but they're really working against it. The next one would be, "Can raise a tragic chorus in a gale." And this is the whole idea of this personifies the weather, and also a Greek chorus was something that commented on the action that was happening, and so it's the whole idea of this weather is commenting on the troubles that are happening at the time. And it also has that effect of hearing the sound of the wind, and the word gale also demonstrates the power of the storm. The next one is the "listen to the thing you fear." Now this and the next quote both have this idea of juxtaposition about the fact that they fear the storm and it's dangerous, but they're so used to it that they're hearing it and they're constantly hearing it. The next one's very similar with the whole "exploding comfortably." So this is the idea once again that they've heard the storm so often that it's almost a comfort to hear these explosions. But it's also the fact that the storm itself is comfortable being there and comfortable to attack them. The next one is also demonstrating the power of this storm and the nature of the storm with the "spits like a tamed cat turned savage." This is simile, so you get your AO2 marks there. Make sure you mention this simile if you use this quote. It's also... Hi, Hannah. This is also zoomorphic kind of language because it's describing the storm as this animal, which also gives it a more primal, wild feel to the storm. And the use of the word savage also highlights this too. Wind dives and strafes invisibly. This is the word we're really focusing on in this quote, is because strafes is a military term, and it alludes to the troubles that this poem is based on, and the troubles in Northern Ireland at the time. So and the next one also has this with "space is salvo." This is another military term. And the third one also has this as well. "We are bombarded with empty air." So bombarded is very echoing of blitzes and bombings and something intentional happening. So it both personifies the storm and it alludes to this whole war that's going on. The empty air is also very interesting because it shows a kind of the nothingness to the storm and how much they're used to it now, because they're so used to being battered by it that it's empty. There's nothing. It's also invisible. You can't see the power of the storm, but it's there and it's attacking you. You can't see wind, but it will still hurt you. It's that idea. And of course we have our last line. Always compare last lines. Really good tip. "Strangers is a huge nothing that we fear." This is the whole idea that they fear the storm, but in the end it is nothing. You can't touch it, you can't grasp it, but it's still something to be afraid of and it can still hurt you. And that's this whole idea of unrest and troubles. It was this whole idea that in Northern Ireland at the time there was this unease to everything and people were attacking, but you couldn't see it, you couldn't see this tension. So it was a huge nothing, but it was very scary. So that would be Storm on the Island done. I've already gone through what poems I'd link Storm on the Island to. So we're going to move right on now to a personal favourite of mine, Kamikaze. So for context for Kamikaze, this is not a heritage poem, this is a modern poem. It's written by Beatrice Garland in 2007. Kamikaze means divine wind in Japanese and was the name given to suicide by dive bombing a plane, a common practice during World War II. It was considered honourable to die by kamikaze in Japanese culture, and dishonour is a massive deal in Japan. So if you felt like you'd brought dishonour on yourself or your family, then it was just the worst thing you could do. There was even a practice called seppuku, where if a samurai or everyone really felt so dishonoured, they would stab themselves with their own sword, and it was supposedly a way to gain back that honour. And the same thing with the dive bombing was seen as an honourable way to die because it was for Japan. Japan's also known as the land of the rising sun. That's important for some of the metaphors, similes that we have in this poem. And the main idea of this poem is how patriotic Japan was during the war. It was Japan or nothing, basically. And in terms of structure, the only one really you can talk about here is the multiple narrative perspective. This creates distance and makes it sound like a story being passed down through generations. So it creates this distance between the character we're following and the persona that's telling it and us hearing it as a reader. So we're going on to key quotes for this one. The first one is embarked at sunrise. The thing we're looking at here is sunrise because of the Japan being the land of the rising sun. So it's this whole idea that Japan is everything and everywhere in this culture. You are there for Japan alone. The same thing with the samurai sword. It both has connotations of violence and it's also a symbol of heritage and culture. Head full of powerful incantations. This one is interesting because this uses the metaphor of powerful incantations being like this brainwashing that the country has had over this pilot. They have made him believe so heavily that he needs to die for his country and go with his country and do this for his country that he's willing to dive bomb a plane. It's almost like being brainwashed or being under some kind of spell or dark magic. So that's what you're looking for there. The next one is like a huge flag waved first one way and then the other in a figure of 8. So I've already done the context for this one, Joe. It's on the front. The thing we're looking at here is firstly the huge flag. Flags are a symbol of patriotism and being loyal to a country, and in quite a few countries they hold the flag as this almost honourable being, so they worship it almost. And the second one we're looking at in this quote is the figure of 8. So it's to show this infinite cycle of war, conflict and patriotism that's going on in the country at the time. Swivel towards the sun is another allusion to Japan being the land of the rising sun. So the fish in this poem are representing soldiers almost, and the fact that they're swiveled towards the sun is that they're showing that they're there for Japan, they're facing towards Japan, they're entranced by Japan. It's this whole idea of patriotism continuing so heavily through the poem. The next one is translucency. This kind of shows how thinly veiled the impression that they're under is, in the fact that something so simple can break the hold that the pilot is under. The next one is built Koreans, and this is more for the fact that Koreans were little stone pebbles, mounds that they would build for dead people. So it just adds this undertone of message of death and destruction coming throughout this poem. So this poem really shows the effects of war and conflict on the individual, on family, and it shows the effect of patriotism and how a big country can affect someone. Shore, salt, sodden. This is just sibilant alliteration, and it creates this sinister sound to it, which once again adds the sinister undertone of the poem. A tuner, the dark prince, muscular, dangerous. The tuna in this poem represents the pilot himself, and the fact that he's the Dark Prince, muscular and dangerous. He is a danger to Japan and their ideals and their beliefs and their patriotism, because he chooses not to follow them in this, and it kind of sheds a light on how dumb and stupid these ideas were, and how if you could just break through them and see, and if enough people did that, then Japan would lose its footing and its hold on the country. The next one we're looking at is treated him as if he no longer existed. This is the idea that what the pilot did by turning around was so dishonourable and so awful that it's so dishonourable and so awful that his family treated him as if he was no longer there. As if he had gone and died on that plane, or as if he just had never existed in the first place. It's that whole idea that in Japan this was the worst thing you could have done. Only we children still talk. This is to show innocence, and how the young children who haven't been brainwashed by the Japanese culture yet still talk to him and still laughed with him and still treated him as still he's so there. But as soon as they kind of grow up a little bit, or even understand the situation and begin to have this brainwashed influence over them from the country, then we too learn to be silent. So this is the loss of innocence from war and conflict and patriotism, and that's another theme you can look into. So these bit of the children represents the loss of innocence. And of course we have the final line of this poem. He must have wondered which had been the better way to die. So this shows that basically, on a symbolic and metaphorical level, the pilot died when he chose to come back, because he dishonoured his family and he dishonoured Japan. So by leaving and not choosing to stay with his country, in their eyes he is now dead. He no longer exists. So it's to look at this metaphorical death that happens from conflict and from war, and that's something you look at. With Kamikaze, there's a lot of poems you can compare it to. The ones I would pick out would be Bayonet Charge, for the difference between the effect of war and conflict on the individual versus on family, but also both individuals as well, since this does show the effect of war on the pilot itself. Another one you could look at for Kamikaze would be Exposure, in terms of patriotism. Bayonet Charge also has that idea of patriotism in it too. Kamikaze can be looking at the power of memory. It can be looking at the power of patriotism, of country. There's lots of poems you can compare this one to. It's a really good ranged poem. So after we've done Kamikaze, the next one we're going to be looking at is the Prelude, or Sealing the Boat, the extract from the Prelude. So first, looking at context, the Prelude was written by William Wordsworth in 1798. Wordsworth was another romantic poet, so he believed in the capacity for wonder, the idea that the world shouldn't be all solved, there should be mystery still lying in the world. Negative capability was another thing he believed in. Pro-revolution, he believed in this idea of fighting and standing up for what you believed in. Hi Lucy, I'm not ignoring you, I'm just trying to keep talking so that when this goes on YouTube it's not that confusing, since the text won't be on there. And the main thing about this poem is it's a formative experience. So this actually happened to William Wordsworth. He actually experienced this, and it's this whole idea that this event formed his character and affected him so greatly. So in terms of structure, we've got one stanza because it's one significant event. It's one significant event that happened to him, and it's focusing on that. The next one is the enjambment, so the flowing, and this just represents how the ideas and memory flows from one to the next. So it makes it seem more like he's recalling this all at once rather than just writing something down. So now we're going to go into key quotes for the Prelude, and there are a lot of them. So the first one we're going to look at is the opening line, because of course, once again, opening and closing lines, compare them because they are your gold, they are your bread and butter. The first line is one summer evening, and in brackets, led by her. So the whole idea of one summer evening is it makes it sound like a story, like an opening to a fairy tale or a book. And you can look at that and how that makes it sound, and how fairy tales and books often have fairy tales and books often have a moral or a lesson to them. So it's this whole idea that this experience had a lesson to him, it taught him something. And the led by her, personifying the boat, it's this could be multiple things. This is where you get your marks for multiple interpretation. So led by her, this could either be the boat itself that he is being attracted to and wanting to steal. This could be Mother Nature that's leading him to do this wrong, or it could just be this kind of nebulous wrong influence that he has inside him, that he wants to do this wrong act, really. And it's interesting that the her, it's personified as a her, because this has sexual connotations. So this is this whole idea that interacting with females is sinful, and sexual thoughts are sinful. So personifying as a her just adds to this effect. The next one we have is tied to a willow tree. So willows are weeping willows. So this represents the kind of sadness, but also the kind of long emotional lasting effects that this event has on William Wordsworth. The next quote we're looking at is the I unloosed her chain. Once again, this is sexual connotations. So William Wordsworth is releasing the boat from her chain. He's taking her out. So he's taking something that's being trapped and releasing it. And once again, the personification as the boat as her creates this sexual effect to the whole thing. Next one I'm looking at is troubled pleasure. So this is a juxtaposition of words here. So this is where you get your AO2 marks. And troubled pleasure shows that William Wordsworth is enjoying this experience, but he knows it's wrong. He has this moral conscience. So this adds this whole ominous tone to the whole experience, because we know it's wrong, but he's enjoying it anyway, up until the Volta of this poem, which we'll get to in a minute. So the next one we're looking at is small circles. Circles in poems always represent, or circles in any literature always represent this cycle, this infinite circle that's going on and will continue to go on. So this event will cycle around his mind. It will continue to affect him years and years later. My YouTube has got the same name as my Instagram account, by the way. And then we look at now this is where we get to start getting to the Volta of the poems. So the horizon's utmost boundary. So this is the whole idea that in his mind, the horizon is the limits. It's as far as it goes. It is the utmost boundary to his scope, to his imagination, to his life. Nothing but the stars and the grey sky. So this is the whole idea of heaven watching down on him, and this is the whole idea of heaven watching down on him and seeing his actions. And the grey sky also shows this kind of murky, ominous effect to the whole poem, since grey is this kind of transition between black and white, and so it shows that what he's doing is not completely good or completely bad. It's grey, it's morally grey. So you can look into colour theory with that. Now this is definitely, I'm sure this is the line that every teenage boy laughed at when we were taught this in class. And it's that she was an elfin pinnace, lustily I dipped my oars. So the elfin pinnace has this kind of fantastical element to it. So it once again leads into this whole fairy tale and idea of a moral being taught. And the lustily, this verb is incredibly sexual. So it really it really shows how this is kind of a sinful experience for him, this stealing. Oh, I don't mind you saving this live stream at all. So this definitely shows this kind of sinful aspect to what he's doing. And I dipped my oars is obviously this kind of sexual release, much like I unloosed her chain. So it's showing him, it's both showing him growing up and also being immature and sinful. So of course this is the volta of the poem. This is the turning point of everything in this poem, is when he sees the mountain in the horizon and it breaks the horizon. And this is important because this is a metaphor for his horizon being broken. His imagination, his scope for what the world looks like has been broken in that point, and everything he thought he knew, he no longer does. So this is an incredibly important moment in his life that breaks him almost. And we can see this from the description of a huge peak, black and huge. This incredibly simplistic language compared to the rest of the poem, which has got these beautiful metaphors and similes and pastoral image and this whole idea. So this really simplistic colloquial language shows how much this has broken him. It's reduced him back to simple words because he literally doesn't have the words to describe what he's seeing. And that's something you really get into. So if you're discussing this poem at all, this can give you almost a paragraph and a half probably of work and writing about it. The next one we go to is as if with voluntary power instinct upreared its head. So this is the whole idea of the personifying this peak. It's like it's almost wanting to break his horizon, like it's like breaking him because he dared to break the rules of his own reality currently. And that continues with the towered up between me and the stars. So it's blocking him from heaven, it's blocking him from this safety and this comfort and this light above him. So it's shielding him from this goodness, and it is shielding him from the light above. And that's the whole idea of that. So whenever anything mentions stars, it's heaven. It's always heaven. It's heaven in Macbeth. It's heaven in Jekyll and Hyde. It's heaven in the poems. It's heaven in Lord of the Flies. It's heaven in everything. And then we go back to the covert of the willow tree. So immediately after this event, he goes back to what he once knew. He tries to go back to this weeping willow. He tries to go back and undo what he did because he doesn't want to feel that way anymore. There it hung a darkness, call it solitude. So this darkness shows how this profound effect has had on him. Darkness, of course, having connotations of evil, mystery, and big ambiguity. So he does not know what's affecting him so much, but he knows it has affected him, and it makes him feel lonely because he can't share it with anyone because it was so personal to him. It's solitude, it's loneliness. The next one is the huge and mighty forms. So this is just the whole idea of how much of a big impact this has had on him, and also the use of forms. It's very vague, it's very ominous, it's very kind of inhuman. So it just shows this idea of how ambiguous his fear is, but it's so real and it's so big to him. And of course we have our last line, always use the last line, were a trouble to my dreams. So this shows that it's affected him on not only a conscious level but a subconscious level. It's affected him right to his very core. And you could take dreams as being the literal dreams, or you could take it to his dreams for the future. So you could show that it's a trouble to his future as well as his present and his past. This is a formative poem, and that's the really important thing about it. So in terms of what you can compare this to, you use Stealing the Boat with power of memory, power of nature. You can use it for internal conflict. That's just a really good poem for that, and it's a really applicable poem for any of those themes. So now that that's done, I do promise once we've got through the poems, guys, we'll do Lord of the Flies. We've only got 4 poems left. We can do this and then we'll do Lord of the Flies. So the next one is bayonet charge, good old bayonet charge. So this bayonet charge context, this was written by Ted Hughes in 1957. This is going to be a long live stream, trust me. Ted Hughes in 1957. Hughes' father was a World War I veteran, so you can use that as he has a primary source on experience of war. Hughes also wrote The Iron Man, which was a book heavily focused on anti-war themes, and Hughes spent 2 years as a mechanic in the RAF. So this is once again this idea of he knows what war is, he understands it. So if anyone doesn't want to stay for the whole of this live stream, I will be uploading it to YouTube later, and you can fast forward and rewind and watch at your pleasure. So hopefully that will help. You can make it through though, Lucy. I know you can. So in terms of structure, it begins in media res, so the whole suddenly. So this means it begins like it's in the middle of a sentence or a story, and this creates a sense of unpreparedness and fear. It shows how much of the rookie these soldiers are. Yes, bayonet charge was in last year's exam, so it probably won't come up tomorrow, but it is still a good one to compare to others, because if you get the main poem as, say, kamikaze, you could totally compare that to bayonet charge. So it is still a good one to have in your bank, especially since it's quite memorable. So yeah, this in media res makes us feel unprepared, as if we are with these soldiers who have not had this preparation, the need for the exams. And it's got 3 regular stanzas, so it's the regular routine of war. It's this whole idea that war is repetitive and it keeps going and it's regular and it's controlled. So then we go into our key quotes for bayonet charge. So suddenly he awoke. This is this in media res, so that we've already gone over this. This is the unpreparedness of the soldier, and it allows us to be there. The word raw is repeated twice, and this also creates this sense of unpreparedness from the soldiers. So bullets smacking the belly out of the air. So this is personifying the air, firstly, and it's personifying it in a very human way, giving it a belly, something that we all can relate to and we all understand. So this personification really creates a human sense of the air, and it creates a human sense of nature. So it shows this kind of man attacking nature and attacking the environment. So the bullets are so harmful that they're even attacking air, something so thin and so flimsy. And it's also, the smacking is a very violent verb, and it's got a very violent sound to it. Patriotic tear. So this is this whole idea of patriotism, and you can definitely link this to kamikaze in that term. Yes, this would also be plosive sounds on this line because of the B and the B. Thank you for reminding that. For anyone who's watching this on YouTube, there are actually comments going up there, but you can't see them because that doesn't happen when you save a video. So patriotic tear, this shows this kind of sadness in patriotism. This kind of whole idea of it's almost brainwashing. It's sad how these soldiers are being forced into this, and also the realization of what the patriotism has done to the soldier. He understands. This next quote also exemplifies this. In what cold clockwork of the stars and nations. So this fricative alliteration here of cold clockwork, it makes it a very harsh and very clinical kind of sound to it, which shows this machine that the war is running on. So and especially the use of clockwork also shows this. All the soldiers are just gears in this machine. They're all there to serve their little purpose, and if they break, they're just replaced. They're just replaced, and their broken selves are sent off. They're not needed. Their individual self is not needed, and this is a really big focus of this poem. And the stars and nations, stars are always heaven, so it's this whole idea of God abandoning them, and also the nations, so it's the whole idea of higher powers not caring. a yellow hair that rolled like a flame. So the hair is a symbol of nature. And the yellow could represent either cowardness or passion. You can take it either way, or you could look at both interpretations, and that will get you more marks. And the rolled like a flame, so this rolled and the threshing circle. It's once again this idea that the war will continue and continue to go, and it will not stop. Then this line's really good and really important. King, honour, human dignity, etc. The etc. is the really important part of this, so do not leave this off. Absolutely do not, because this shows how, to this soldier, these things have just become like a list, like something people just yell at you. They don't mean anything to him anymore, and these should be important things. King, honour, human dignity. These are all incredibly important values, but this war has made him apathetic to them. And that's what's really important about this. So because he understands that he is merely a cog in this big machine, he does not care anymore. Drop like luxuries. This also shows how these things are luxuries. They are for someone who is privileged enough not to know what war is really about and what the country is really fighting for. So it's a privilege to have even believe in these qualities anymore in his mind. And of course, say it with me now, last line. And his terror's touchy dynamite. So the T in the T, this is dental alliteration. And this just has the effect of something being very short and snappy, and the dynamite shows how he's on edge. He's about to explode almost because of the way this war is. It also kind of foreshadows maybe his imminent death. He feels like and knows he's going to die in this war. This will be his end. So that's it for Bayonet Charge. In terms of themes or questions that would go along this, so it'd be power of nature, power of conflict on the individual, power of patriotism, conflict of war. Any of these ideals would fit really well, or power of nature even you could go into. So that would be Bayonet Charge. 3 more to go, guys. And then we'll do Lord of the Flies. Okay, so Remains, one of my personal favourites. So the context for Remains. So this was written by Simon Armitage in 2008. So it's not a heritage poem, it's a modern poem. It was written after Armitage interviewed a group of veterans with PTSD. So it's based on real experiences. And he often took their words verbatim from the interviews. And so that's why this poem has a very colloquial feel to it, and also why it's a very real experience. In terms of structure, it has regular 3-line stanzas until the very last one. So it shows, so these 2 lines, this could possibly indicate that it's just between the 2 men in the end, or it could be giving a sense of unfinishedness to the story. So the fact that this guilt and PTSD will never leave this soldier, it will always keep going. Just a quick drink. Verbatim means word for word, basically. And it's also a colloquial tone in media res, very realistic, intimate, personal, and anecdotal. So once again, this gives a very real experience to the soldier's interviews. It makes it sound like it's coming directly from a soldier's mouth. So key quotes in terms of Remains. So on another occasion, we got sent out. So this is in media res, so it makes it sound like we're in the beginning of a story, like he's already told something else. And there's this colloquial tone, so that's something you pick up. This is a really important line for this poem. Probably armed, possibly not. So this is this whole idea that the man they shot, there's a slight doubt in his mind about whether it was right to shoot him. The probably first shows that he knows he was probably armed, and he wishes he was, because that meant his killing was justified and he didn't kill an innocent man. The possibly comes after, because this is the doubt in his mind. It's this doubt, it's this niggling fear in the back of his mind that will never leave him, the fact that he might have shot an innocent man. And once again, this is this colloquial tone in this line. So, well, myself and somebody else and somebody else. So this colloquial tone coming out as well. But it also shows this whole inhumanity to the other soldiers. Either he doesn't want to name them, or he can't name them because they were just this kind of faceless being in this story. It's something that somebody did. It's just somebody else. It's not another person, it's just somebody else. Colloquial means a very relaxed, casual tone with lots of slang and stuff like that. The next one is, I see every round as it rips through his life. This is this very violent image of the man getting shot. So the rips is a really violent verb in terms of this. Is a very violent verb in terms of this, and also the rips through his life. So this could either be literally, as in it rips through his body and he can it's literally tearing his flesh apart, or it could be on the metaphorical level of it, symbolically it's tearing his life apart, it's ripping it, it's something that can't be stitched back together, it's not a clean break, it's a rip. He is forever gone, his life has been broken. And this is reinforced by the next quote of, I see broad daylight on the other side. This is, once again, you can take it on the literal or symbolic level. So literally he could see the sun through his body because there are so many bullet holes and he's been torn apart. Or metaphorically, he can see this kind of light on the other side. He can see this other place that this man is going to. And since heaven is often, or the afterlife is often referred to as the other side. The next line is kind of this this absolute epitome of pain this man is. So the pain itself, the image of agony. This just shows how much the soldier was affected by this because of the way this man looked. So this is just a quick quote for something like that. The next one is, end of story, except not really. So this is this juxtaposition and kind of oxymoronic language of the fact that technically that is the end of the story, but it's not, because it's not for this soldier, because it continues. So if, and we can see this in the next quote of blood shadow. So we can take this literally as in there's actually a blood shadow on the street staining it, or it's this shadow, this impression left behind by this man in his mind, since shadow is often something quite transient, and it is something that you can't grasp. It's something that he can't quite grasp onto, but he knows there, and it will always be there as this dark spot in his mind. And the next one continues this with, and the drink and drugs won't flush him out. So this man is actively trying to get rid of this image, but he can't because it's still there. Not even substance abuse can get rid of it. And it's that whole idea of trying to flush him out, literally cleanse his system of this man, but he can't do it. Not left for dead in some distant, sun-stunned, sand-smothered land. So obviously here in this line, we've got the sibilant alliteration, and this just adds this very sinister, silent tone to the whole thing, and also kind of almost sounds like a sandy wind blowing, and it just makes it sound like it's almost being kept quiet, which was in the interviews, if you look at that, quite a lot of the soldiers said their PTSD, they were told to keep quiet about it and not be babies about it because it was seen as unmanly. So this, you could look at that in this way. It also shows how how far, the several adjectives here also shows how far the man wants to be removed from this body, how far he wants to be away from this image, but he isn't, because his bloody life is in his bloody hands. Yeah, his bloody life in my bloody hands. So you can either take this two ways. You can either take this as bloody being the in terms of the swear word of just the so you could either take it that way, or you could take it as the literal blood of the okay, bye Lucy. You can take it as the literal blood on his hands. So if you say you've got someone's blood on your hands, that means you're guilty, you're responsible for their death. So this man feels the responsible for this other man's death, and that's what's really important about this poem. So in terms of what you compare, what topics come up, so this is obviously power of memory, guilt, conflict, effect of conflict on the individual, and this is obviously good for that. Two more, we can do this. So the second to last one, the penultimate poem, is Exposure. This was written by Wilfred Owen in 1917. Wilfred Owen was a soldier who saw active service in World War One. He died 7 days before the war ended. He didn't believe in the war at all. He thought it was silly and stupid, and he wrote these poems to expose what was going on. And this was written while serving in the trenches, so it's a very real and personal experience. Structure. It has lots of ellipsis to emphasize the waiting, also elongates the lines. So this just whole emphasizes this whole poem is about waiting to die. And these ellipses elongate this feeling. So these men want to die almost because it's being so stretched out. The regular stanzas demonstrate the monotony of the experience, and the repetition of "but nothing happens" reinforcing how tenuous the experience is. So it's just this whole idea of waiting to die and how boring waiting to die is. The title itself also, Exposure, so you can either be exposed to the elements, you can die of exposure, or it's exposing something, it's exposing a secret, and that's the main idea of this poem. So the key quotes now. So the first one is this: "Our brains ache." So this is this whole personal pronoun of "our." So this is a universal experience. The soldiers are going through this together. So this is definitely not a poem for the effect of conflict on the individual. It's about team. It's about the effect of conflict on a lot of people. So this would be a good one to compare to London, I think. But ice east winds that knife us. This verb knife here, it's very unusual. So it really just shows how stabbing and how intentional this wind feels. It personifies it. It makes it seem like it's trying to hurt them on purpose. The next one is low drooping flares confuse our memory of the salient. If something's salient, it's important, it's relevant, it's crucial. So these flares confuse their memory of what's important and what's not. They don't know anymore because there's so many flares and there's so many battles and so many wars. They just can't remember anymore. It's all meaningless to them now. And of course, but nothing happens. So this repetition of this throughout the poem really shows how tenuous and monotonous this experience is. Nothing is happening and they are dying. They're dying for nothing. They're dying whilst nothing is happening and they're left in these trenches. It's just this whole idea of that. Like some dull rumour of some other war. So this personifies the war itself and makes it sound like they don't know what the real war is anymore because there's so much going on around them. Also, there's nothing happening to them currently, so all the battle just sounds like it's coming from somewhere else, like some dull rumour. What are we doing here? This is this questioning, so you can maybe link this to bayonet charge in the terms of that's a soldier questioning why he's there. These people don't know why they're there anymore because everything is meaningless. The poignant misery of dawn. So this just shows how another day is misery to them. It's poignant misery. It's so important. And another day in this situation is hell to them because of the weather and because of the conditions they are under. It's attacking them, and that's what's really important about this poem. Clouds say stormy, sag stormy even. I can't read my own writing. So this is the whole idea of these clouds are weighing down with the storm, which is also kind of this pathetic fallacy for the war going on itself, but also the fact that the nature is the enemy here and it's attacking them. And this is especially seen in the next one, in massing in the east her melancholy army. So this is the whole idea of firstly, the sun rises in the east, so this is another day. It's another day, and that's sadness to them because they don't want to live another day. They want to die because of the way the world is for them. Melancholy army. This demonstrates how it's a very firstly it's a very downtrodden army, and it also personifies the nature as the enemy, as the attacking force rather than actual soldiers. Sudden successive flights of bullets streak the silence. This sibilant alliteration really makes it intensifies the imagery because it gives off the sound of the bullets streaking past your ears. More quiet, closer sounds will always be more scary than big explosions, and that's a really good effect in this poem. This sound makes it sound like they're literally streaking past the reader's ears, so it just intensifies the situation. Sun dozed, so this just shows how the sun is making them sleepy. It's once again nature attacking them. It's nature having an effect on them. This poem is all about the effect of nature on the soldiers. The doors are closed, we turn back to dying. So this is when the soldiers are imagining going back to their families, but since the doors are closed, since they cannot go back, they would rather die. They know they're never going back, so they're just going to turn back to dying. It's this whole idea of, because we cannot go back, we're just going to die here. For the love of God seems dying, so this shows loss of faith. They no longer believe in God or a higher power anymore because of the effect the weather's having them, and because of how slowly they are dying and the pain they're in. They cannot believe in this higher power or the love of the higher power because of the torture they're under. This frost will fasten on this mud and us. So this once again personifies nature. It seems like it makes the frost seem like it's deliberately attaching themselves to it and attacking the people. And of course, final line, pours over half-known faces, all their eyes are ice. So this shows how the men afterwards are digging up the corpses, and all their eyes are ice. Since this doesn't specify who it's talking about, this could either be the men digging up the corpses and their eyes are glazed over, they're frozen, they're icy, they're cold to emotion because they cannot feel it anymore for these men because so many have died. It also shows the literal effect of the cold on these still alive men. Or it could be the men itself who have died, and they say the eyes are the window to the soul, so it could show just how cold and emotionless and literally freezing these men were when they died. This poem is obviously power of nature, effect of war on a group. So this would be an amazing one to link to Storm on the Island. It just really good poem for that. It's just a really good poem in terms of that. So we're on last poem now. Very last one, and it's the old favourite, Ozymandias. So Ozymandias, context, this was written in 1817 by Percy Bysshe Shelley, who was a romantic poet and also the husband to Mary Shelley, famous writer of Frankenstein. Romanticism was a rejection of the current power system and any sort of attempts to control what should not be controlled, e.g. nature, which is very prevalent throughout this poem. And the structure of this poem is a multiple narrative perspective. So I've missed out a bit on content. Shelley was an avid supporter of revolutions going on during the time. During this time period, so e.g. the French Revolution, the American Revolution, all the revolutions, every revolution. In terms of structure, this has a multiple narrative perspective. This creates distance between the reader and Ozymandias, demonstrating how little he currently influences the world. He has no influence on the world because the persona itself has to be told by another guy who then gets told by a plaque. So it's this whole idea of distance. It's a sonnet. It's thoughtful. It's reflective. Many people really have to think to remember Ozymandias. It's an effort to remember this guy because of how much of a lack of influence he now has on the world. And the interrupted rhyming showing Ozymandias' slip on power. He doesn't have as much control as he thinks he does. And now we go for key quotes on this one. So our first quote is antique land. So this is the whole idea that this land is fragile. It's so old, it's rare almost, and it could almost be valuable because of how rare it is and how nebulous it is. and it also it just shows the age of this land. Vast and trunkless legs of stone. Legs are the foundation, so that shows that this statue, this power, has a strong foundation. But since the legs are the only thing left, it shows that it's only got its foundation to stand on. There's nothing left. Shattered visage. So the visage is the face, and of course it's the main feature. So this shows how Ozymandias' outlook, Ozymandias' power is shattered, it's gone. His visage is no longer there, it's no longer there to look out. And of course, if we don't have a sculpture of his face, then of course we don't know what he looks like, and then we won't remember him even more. Sneer of cold command, fricative alliteration. This creates this very harsh sound, and it shows Ozymandias was a tyrant, showing Percy Bysshe Shelley's criticism of this tyrannical style of leadership. The hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. So this shows that this sculptor is doing it satirically. He does not like Ozymandias, so even people in his time thought he was a tyrant. And then of course we have the main quote from this poem. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. This line is incredibly ironic because it demonstrates how much Ozymandias believed he had everything. He has so many works, but of course if you look around the statue, there is nothing left. Nothing beside remains. It's this whole idea of irony, and how if you have that much power, if you think you have that much power, you're not going to last. Your power is meaningless. Power is transient. Power is temporary compared to the overpowering level of nature, especially in this poem. Colossal wreck is just another example of how much this land around is destroyed. Boundless and bare, this is plosive alliteration, once again showing the emptiness of the land around him. And of course the last one, the lone and level sands stretch far away. So the liquid alliteration here symbolises time stretching out forever along with the sands. So time has passed, and now Ozymandias has no more power. He is left to the sands of time, literally. And also this is Percy Bysshe Shelley's criticism of tyrannical power, saying that if you do not want to be remembered by history, you will not be remembered. You are temporary, and this style of power is wrong and transient. Ozymandias could come up for just power in general. Leadership, power of nature, even you could go with that. This compares really well to London. I've compared these poems before and they work really well together. So that is all the poems done. So if you are not studying Lord of the Flies, this is where you can hop off and go do whatever else you want to do, because we are going to get right into Lord of the Flies now. So everyone's favourite book about child murder, Lord of the Flies, here we go. So here I've just put down a bunch of quotes that I think could work in any essay about any part of Lord of the Flies. I'm just going to go through all of them and explain why I've chosen them and what you can talk about with them. We've got a lot to get through, so buckle yourselves in, let's go. So we're going to start with chapter 1 and The Boy with Fair Hair. This is the first line of the book, and it's also the first introduction of Ralph, who is of course the main character. The introduction of him as the boy with fair hair alludes to Aryan ideals, so it shows Ralph as this very kind of proper boy and the complete epitome of perfection sort of in the time, since Lord of the Flies was written in 1954, just after World War II and in the midst of the Cold War. The long scar smashed into the jungle. This is the whole idea of the boys having an effect on the island itself. They're breaking it. Man is destroying nature and man is breaking nature. And the whole idea of a scar is something that is permanent. It will not fade, it will not go. So the boys have had a permanent effect on this island by just even being here for a few moments even. So the next one is this is Piggy's first introduction. So with Piggy, Ralph and Jack, their first introductions are really important because it gives us their first ideas of their character and also foreshadows their character as well. So he was shorter than the fair boy and very fat. So this immediately paints Piggy as a victim, but with two flaws. He was shorter and very fat. So we immediately see Piggy as this victim, as this bullied character, as someone less than Ralph, because he is shorter than Ralph. So we immediately see Piggy as less than Ralph from the very beginning of his introduction. Jack's first introduction is, the full quote is, "In the diamond haze of the beach, something dark was fumbling along." So the use of the pronoun something indicates this very inhuman, primal, creature-like thing, and it could foreshadow Jack's later very atavistic nature and his very primal urges that he acts upon. And also the use of the dark indicates something very evil and sinister. It's this it just foreshadows the kind of evil nature of the choir boys. The fumbling also indicates something not quite as sophisticated or cognitive as humans, something that can't quite function properly. The next quote that I'm looking at is, "We ought to have a chief to decide things." So this is the idea that immediately the boys are away from civilization, they're away from everything that they need to be, they're away from literally everything society's created, but immediately they create society. They need order. They have a chief. They have rules. They blow the conch. They create the society immediately. And this is Golding's commentary on how mankind has a need to organise itself into society and have power. It's also the mankind's need for power, and this is heavily demonstrated in Jack Seized the Conch. The conch is used as a motif throughout the whole story as a symbolisation of democracy, leadership and power. Since Jack seizes the conch, this demonstrates immediately Jack wants this power. He wants this power for himself. It also has the verb of seize, demonstrating a very forceful takeover. This line also is really useful because it foreshadows the later conflict in the story of Jack taking over Ralph's power and Jack taking over the island in a very forceful way. So you can use that for the overtaking. This is chapter 2, by the way, that we're on now. Snake thing. So this is the first introduction of the beast, when the boy with the mulberry birthmark calls it a snake thing. The snake thing obviously has allusions to Christianity and the Bible and the story of first sin. So this immediately paints the beast as this idea of a representation of sin and as the first sin of mankind especially. So we get this cool conceptual level on we get this on a conceptual level of what the beast represents, literally, symbolically even. The next quote we're going to look at is, "This is our island. It's a good island." So this is this idea of the English idea of colonisation at the time, and how they immediately declare the land as theirs and only theirs. They claimed it. It doesn't matter if it's owned by someone else. It doesn't matter what country it's in. It doesn't matter what territory it's in. They've landed on it. It's theirs. And because it's theirs, it's good. So that's that allusion to that. This is the description of the fire. So of course the fire is a really central bit in the book that first shows the kind of savage nature of the boys when they immediately want to go, let's make a fire, and they all run up there. And this shows this, so the fire thrust out a savage arm. So this personifies the fire as something living, as something moving. And when it kills the boy with the mulberry birthmark, this makes it almost seem intentional by the fire, as if the nature is attacking back from what the boys stole from it. The use of the word savage also really reinforces this. I'm just going to stop the live stream here and start again. For everyone who's here, hello, I'm going to have to stop the live stream and start again because Instagram has informed me that I have run out of time and it's literally about to end in like 15 seconds. So I'm going to stop it and start again. Please can everyone join and come back and we'll continue. I'll be done back in a minute. Okay, so the the quote we're on is and this is in chapter 3 we're in now. And the quote we're on is, this is the description of Jack when he first begins hunting, and the quote is, became less of a hunter than a furtive thing, ape-like. So this demonstrates how Jack performing this savage act of hunting actually reduces him to a more primal state. It's a furtive thing. This idea of the thing is really important because it dehumanizes Jack and makes him more and more into a creature. This is reinforced by their ape-like. So this is the whole idea of Darwinism and evolution and how we're descended from apes. So this shows that how when humanity is presented as doing more primal acts, doing these more savage acts, then that demonstrates how then that makes us more primal, more savage. It reduces us to less of a human state, and that's exactly what happens to Jack throughout this book. The more power he gains, the more savage acts he completes, the less human he becomes. That's a really good conceptual point to put in your essay if you end up talking about him. The next one is also this idea of savage acts, and it's that he tried to convey the compulsion to track down and kill that was swallowing him up. This demonstrates that this is a very primal instinct that's coming from Jack. It's not something cognitive or conscious, it's instinctual, it's subconscious, and this could link to the Freudian theory of the id, the most primal part of the brain. So this is a compulsion to him to kill and track down, demonstrating how man is truly primal at heart, and the fact that it's swallowing him up, he's allowing it to happen. He's being completely consumed by this act of hunting, of wanting to kill. So that's the first 3 chapters done in our key quotes. Let's keep going. So chapter 4, we've got good old Roger. Who doesn't love Roger? And this is when Roger is throwing stones at the little boys. And it says, Roger was conditioned by a civilization that knew nothing of him and was in ruins. This is the idea that Roger can't hit the boys. He's been so conditioned, even though he wants to, he's been so conditioned by the society he lived in not to, that he can't do it, even though the society itself is in ruins. And this is this whole idea of the boys expect the grown-ups to have answers and think of the outer world as better and have a good society, when that is actually in ruins. It's broken, it's at war, it's destroyed, and the grown-ups don't know any better than the boys themselves do. So this shows the effect of society on the boys. It also demonstrates how when society is removed, these boys act more on their instincts. So Roger was always evil, but it was the society that kept him in check, and only the society. He doesn't have the moral conscience not to hit the boys. He fears the consequences if he does. So this is the whole idea that humans are not inherently moral. They just fear the consequences of the society they've built up that is moral. So that's chapter 4 done. So then we move on to chapter 5. And this is when Ralph is having his existential crisis, and the understanding the wearisomeness of this life. This is when Ralph begins to understand how the adult life and the world works, and how stuck they are on this island. He's having this moment of panic where he understands that they are stuck and trapped and they can't get off. He also begins to understand kind of this vile human nature and how he wants to be clean, and how he also says that he's not intelligent, not like Piggy. He has the maturity to understand that Piggy is more intelligent than him and can think his way out of the problems. So this is a really important moment for Ralph in terms of his maturity. The next one is when we also see the other side to and then we see this is the bit where we see Jack and his hunters. So this is the chant of the kill the pig, cut her throat, spill her blood. So this is this very primal and simplistic and basic chant, something very childish almost in nature, something very basic that even young children could repeat. A chant is very easy to learn, and so it shows this very kind of primal want to kill, and this almost very native acts of chanting in the kind of stereotypes that existed at the time of these savage natives chanting and having rituals. So, and then of course we have the talk of a thing, a dark thing. This is talking about the beast, and it is let's talk about the beast, and the use of the thing makes it very inhuman, and also the dark thing. This alludes to the fact that the beast is them. It's their fears. What they fear actually is themselves. They fear themselves turning savage and turning on one another. And this is exemplified in the whole mankind's essential illness, and what I mean is maybe it's only us. This is truly Simon understanding this, since Simon is the character in this that tells the truth, and he seems to have this higher level of understanding of what the boys are and what they truly fear and what the beast is. So Simon is Jesus, basically. And you could also say he maybe represents the superego in terms of this higher level of thinking that the other boys don't seem to be capable of. Ralph occasionally has this, and maybe even Piggy, but then those two are mostly focused on the ego and this kind of central intelligence, where Simon is the more higher level thinking. Piggy's line actually though is what are we, humans or animals or savages? So he understands that the boys are acting silly, and they're losing their society, and Piggy needs society because society protects him from getting bullied. Without society and these moral codes and the punishments set out by adults, he would be mercilessly bullied. And this is after Jack and his hunters forget to stoke the fire, and they miss a signal ship. And this is a really important moment in the book where Ralph and Jack begin to butt heads and get more angry at each other. The next one is the grown-ups know things. This is this whole naive idea that the boys have, that the grown-ups could solve all their problems. That if the grown-ups were here, nothing would go wrong, there would be no savagery, they'd be rescued very quickly. And of course, they're wrong. They're wrong because the world around them is in ruins, it's in tatters. And we in this same chapter, in the next chapter, we immediately get the signal from the outside world of the grown-ups, which contradicts this idea. Where the signal from the outside world is the airman, which is a symbol of conflict. This dead airman is the symbol of the war and the symbol of death that's going on in the world around them. Simon also has this realization in chapter 6, where we are now, of the picture of a human at once heroic and sick. This is the whole idea of the fact that humans are inherently violent and primal and sick, but they're also capable of repressing these and becoming heroic, becoming these intelligent figures like Ralph, like Piggy, like Simon, who don't succumb so much to this primal instinct, although we do see it in them in several occasions. We're on chapter 7 now, so we haven't got too far to go. This is the whole idea of this is when Ralph is having another existential crisis. He seems to have a lot of them. And this is one was clamped down, one was helpless, one was condemned, one was... And this repetition shows how it's a very universal thing, and how he feels like on this island he is trapped and he can't escape, both from the physical island itself and the society they've created. He cannot escape from these primal instincts, this savage society that Jack is forcing on him, and the nature of the island itself. But in this chapter, we also see this other side to Ralph, where he wants to hunt and he wants to be part of these savage activities. And this is where we see the desire to squeeze and hurt was overmastering. So this is once again this desire. It's this basic instinct. It's this primal need to hurt and kill. And once again, it's swallowing up. It's consuming him. It's overmastering. And we can compare this to that earlier quote about Jack, and this would be a really good link between the two characters to show how they both have the same primal instincts, yet Ralph suppresses them and becomes more, and finds ways to get off the island and doesn't succumb to them, whereas Jack completely does. We can really see this later when he is stark naked. So, and then the final one for this chapter is something like a great ape. So this is a description of the beast from air, the airman, and how he describes the great ape. This, once again, this whole idea of Darwinism and evolution. So the man is less than human, he is the beast. And of course, since the beast symbolises the boy's savagery, it's saying the boys themselves are less than human, they are apes. So that's this flashcard done. We're going to move on to chapter 8 now. Ralph thrusts the conch into Jack's arms. So this is when the boys are having an argument, and this is just before Jack leaves and says, I don't want to play any longer, not with you, which is a very childish response, showing how, you know, Jack is inherently being childish and immature during this story. But Ralph thrusts the conch into Jack's arms. This is this kind of overseer of power. This is transition for power, where Ralph gives over the power to Jack, which he does, and he doesn't do it willingly, really, but in this moment where he lets Jack split off and lets him take these hunters, he has given the power to him symbolically. So this is the point in this, and this just symbolises the turning point in the story where the power transitions from Ralph to Jack. This is the this sweating in the silence. So this is from when Simon is sat there almost meditating, letting him be. Presently he was thirsty, and then he was very thirsty, and he continued to sit. This is this whole idea of kind of self-suffering, the sweating in the silence. So it's this very idea of martyrdom that Simon is displaying. So you link this where you link this way you link it to Jesus, and this whole idea of sacrificing yourself for others. So he's sacrificing himself because he needs to think, because he needs to understand what's going on so he can help the other boys. Now, Caden's really going to enjoy this bit. But so this is where we talk about the attack on the sow, and where how this whole scene is definitely the epitome of savagery on the island. That and the deaths of the boys. So cross-cut points were a torment. This is fricative alliteration. This just shows the violence of the situation, where it's very harsh and cold and very awful. This is exemplified by the torment. So this is not just pain, this is torture, this is prolonged suffering, and it's so the boys are not just killing this animal mercifully, they're tormenting it, and it's almost on purpose, since torture is quite often to see your victim suffer. That's the intention. So it gives the boys' acts a much more malicious edge. And the whole sexual connotation of the scene comes when Jack was on top of the sow, stabbing downwards. So this definitely kind of shows the patriarchy at the time, and how this epitome of motherhood, this sow, Jack is on top of her and stabbing downwards. Jack has the power in this situation, and he is pushing down on the sow, and he is stabbing downwards. So it definitely has this sexual connotation to it, and could almost be an allegory for rape in this way. So you can look at this whole scene in terms of that. And so this definitely shows Jack killing this symbol of motherhood, maybe seeing this kind of feminist attitude as more weak than him, and that's why he is killing this sow. Then, of course, we have Simon's probably epilepsy-induced a conversation with the Lord of the Flies itself. So the half-shut eyes were dim with the infinite cynicism of adult life. So this shows how the Lord of the Flies head itself is it shows the cynicism of adult life. So it's how once you become an adult, everything is just it's just cynical. It doesn't mean anything. You can't trust anything or believe anything truly anymore, because you have this cynical view to everything. And that's the idea of that. And there's this loss of innocence, which is a really big, important part of this story, since Ralph at the end it is the epitome of the loss of innocence. So it's how much Simon has already understood this. The Lord of the Flies hung on his stick and grinned. This is really interesting. Firstly, because the Lord of the Flies is the literal translation of Beelzebub, which means the devil. And also the fact that this pig changes gender the minute it becomes the Lord of the Flies. So the minute it becomes Satan, and the minute it becomes this representation of this evil thing, and this man, and this violent nature of man, it changes gender, which is really interesting. So that could possibly symbolize that maybe men are more violent than women, or it could just symbolize how the devil itself may be male, or once this female influence is removed, it's removed from everything. So once Jack has killed this female influence, nothing can ever be feminine again. And actually, we see this because after Jack kills the sow, we later have the death of Piggy and the conch, which were both symbols of femininity on the island. And of course, this is a really good one for Jack in chapter 8. Stark naked, save for paint and a belt, was Jack. This shows how, since clothing is a motif throughout this story to symbolise how the boys tie civilization, this just shows how Jack has become completely detached from society and civilization at this point. He is no longer a part of this very orderly and moral society, because all he has is paint and a belt, and the paint itself is a very savage thing that he hides behind. It's a mask, as stated earlier in the book. This also is exemplified by how in the last few chapters of the book, Jack, apart from by Ralph, Jack is only referred to as Chief by the other characters pretty much. So apart from Piggy and Ralph and occasionally Sam and Eric, Jack is Chief. He is no longer Jack, he is Chief. And this is really important because it just dehumanises him. It makes him, he is only his power anymore. He's gained so much power that he's no longer human. He is just his title and nothing else. So this is Simon's death in chapter 9. Of course, this is really important because this represents sort of Simon's death represents the end of this kind of higher thinking by a lot of the boys in the island. It also represents the real crossing the boundary of true savagery, killing one of your own kind. Also, the fact that Simon was attempting to tell them the truth about the beast and then was killed for them thinking he was the beast, when really the reason they killed him was they are the beast, adds this very interesting level of depth to the whole encounter, and really demonstrates how they don't want to hear the truth that they are the beast because they fear it so much. They fear themselves. And Ralph sort of understands this later, but no other character apart from Simon truly understands this as much. So the quotes we've got here are, "The water rose further and dressed Simon's coarse hair with brightness." This whole idea of this kind of halo and very pretty effect to Simon's death. He is released almost, and this is also seen in Simon's dead body moved out to the open sea. In death, Simon is free from this society, and he is free from mankind and free from the island. He has escaped. He's moved out to the open sea. And of course, the connotations of brightness are purity, goodness, and definitely with Simon, the religious connotations. It being around his hair definitely shows this halo effect. When Simon is killed, this description of the mob as a throb and stamp of a single organism definitely shows how the boys are all of one mind at this point. They've reduced to this very primal savage brain that all of mankind has, and that's what makes them kill Simon. That's what makes them fear a human being so much. They're irrational. They don't have this rational thought anymore. They are one single primal mind, and they kill. Hello, Caden. Now we move on to chapter 10. So we've only got 3 more chapters to go. And so this is Ralph talking about after Simon's death. He says, "I'm frightened of us." So this is Ralph beginning to understand the sort of nature of what the beast actually was and who the true danger of this island is. It's them. They've killed another person now. This means that they are dangerous and they could kill another person, which they do. And of course, in this chapter, Piggy tries to justify the murder with, "It was dark. We were scared." So Piggy refuses to believe that Simon was murdered. He refuses to accept responsibility for this death because he does not want to believe that happened. But we see in later chapters that he does eventually accept this. And this is in chapter 11. Piggy says young Simon was murdered. This is him eventually accepting the fact that he did play a role in this and that Simon died by their hands. It wasn't some beast. It wasn't some unavoidable death. It was them, and it was their fear, and it was their primal attitude. It was mankind's essential illness that killed Simon, and the use of the word murdered instead of the use of the word murder instead of any of the euphemistic language Piggy was using before really shows how murder is something intentional. It's if it's manslaughter, then it's not intentional. Murder is something you deliberately do. You deliberately kill someone. So Piggy is accepting the fact that these boys deliberately killed Simon. This slide here, to remember what Jack looked like. This is once again demonstrating how Jack's humanity has been completely lost to the point where Ralph can't even remember what he looks like anymore. This is Piggy's death. So this is chapter 11, and this is during Piggy's death. The conch exploded into 1,000 white fragments and ceased to exist. In this story, the conch represents democracy, order, sensibility. It represents all of this. So the conch exploding in this way and ceasing to exist represents the end of sanity. It represents the end of democracy. It represents the end of any sort of sensible leadership, order, society. It represents the end of all of this. This is the point in the book where all of this is gone and there is no sense of hope or sanity anymore in the story. Also, the description of it is 1,000 white fragments. The white obviously has the connotations of purity and goodness in it. Piggy's death itself is this, the main quote you want to use for this one is, his head split open and stuff came out and turned red. This really simplistic colloquial language really it really represents how this sanity and intelligence, especially the intelligence, is gone from the island. Now Piggy is dead because they no longer have the words to describe them anymore. Piggy's death is almost very, it's very disrespectful almost. Simon had a very beautiful, descriptive, very light and beautiful death, whereas Piggy just has the simple description of his head split open and stuff came out and turned red. It's not even blood, it's just stuff. Piggy is just stuff, and this just really forces in this death of intelligence now that Piggy is gone on the island. Right, last chapter now. We're almost done. So this is chapter 12, and this is of course when Ralph is being hunted, and then of course the rescue of the book. So this is Sam and Eric talking to Ralph, and they say they've been instructed to throw our spears like at a pig. This represents how Ralph is really being seen as an animal to be hunted now. He's prey to Jack. He's something that he can use and something that he can kill without any remorse. So this really just shows how far Jack's devolved, that he no longer sees another human being as a human being, but merely just an animal that he can kill. This snarling with the spear, this is Ralph, not anyone else. And this represents how Ralph, confronted with this fear and this horrible situation, he is devolving into these primal instincts like he did previously in the book, and he's snarling with this weapon. He's trying to become more animalistic. He is devolving into this out of pure fear. It's this fight or flight reaction, and he is fighting. Another one is Roger, who carried death in his hands. So Roger killed Piggy by rolling the stone. That's another quote you can use for the end of Piggy, was the hangman's horror. Roger carries the ability to kill, and he really is that threat on the island, the ability to kill. This also demonstrates how, now that society's been completely removed, now the conscience completely gone, Roger has really embraced what he was originally, just he no longer has fear for consequences anymore. So this is when the naval officer has shown up, and this is a description of Jack after society is being reintroduced and the naval officer has shown up. A little boy started forward, then changed his mind and stood still. This description of Jack as a little boy demonstrates how once society is reintroduced and he no longer has that power or that lack of consequences, he immediately reverts back to being a schoolboy, as into a child, and he no longer has the gumption to stand up and speak and be this savage creature. He's now a little boy. He's no longer chief, he's a little boy, and that juxtaposition is really important. And of course we have our ending line, the one I use for every conclusion and every Lord of the Flies essay. Ralph wept for the end of innocence, the darkness of man's heart, and the fall through the air of the true wise friend called Piggy. So this represents really everything Ralph has lost in this book. Firstly, the end of innocence. He no longer has the innocence he once had, and he understands the darkness of man's heart. He understands the savage nature of humans, and he can never not understand that again. He is permanently scarred by this experience, and he will forever know how savage mankind can be now and how truly evil they are at heart. And that's the darkness of man's heart right there. And of course the thing he really the losing of Piggy, so the true wise friend called Piggy. This is Ralph understanding that even though he didn't like Piggy in the beginning, he tried to avoid him because he was what society deemed as weaker, the victim. He was shorter than Ralph, he was fat, he wore glasses, he was a true wise friend. Piggy was more intelligent than him, and Piggy stuck by him until the very end. Everyone else deserted Ralph. Piggy was the only person not to desert Ralph. He was killed, he was murdered, and that's what's really important about losing Piggy, because he and I guess technically Simon were both the only people that stuck by Ralph completely. And that is a really good conclusion to any essay on Lord of the Flies. So that is all what I believe to be the really key quotes for Lord of the Flies, and the ones you can use in pretty much any essay. Now, I don't know if people want me to do this, but I have some quick questions on Lord of the Flies and essay titles, and I've just made quick plans for all of them and what I'd write for each of them. I can go through these now if you want, or we can just end the live stream here. What do you guys think? Do you guys think we should go through these essays or not, or do you want to end here? Okay, yeah, if anyone wants any notes, I can obviously send them to you guys. I will keep going then if someone wants me to. And remember, this will be uploaded to YouTube and left on my story for afterwards. Yeah, so you can check this out anytime. I'll keep going and I'll finish this up and then upload it for YouTube, and you can look later if you'd like. So how does Golding present violence in All the Flies? For this I put the death of the sow, the mock pig hunt, so Ralph losing control, the death of Piggy, and in conclusion, violence is inherently human vice, and it lays inside us all. Thank you so much for joining me, guys, by the way, and for those leaving now, thank you so much for coming. The next one is, how does Golding present Piggy as a true wise friend? Piggy had the idea to blow the conch in the first place, such as intelligence. Piggy stays with Ralph when everyone abandons him, the true friend, and Piggy's death symbolises the death of sanity. That's what I do for that one. The ending of Lord of the Flies is shocking. How is this built up, and why is it so effective? It's foreshadowed in the first chapter. Jack sees the conch, something dark was fumbling along. The beast, the darkness inside them, slowly becomes more of a threat throughout the book until it consumes them, and the juxtaposition between the society at the beginning and the chaos of the end. Write about the importance of two of the following relationships in Lord of the Flies: Ralph and Piggy, Ralph and Simon, Ralph and Jack, Jack and the Little Uns. So I did Ralph and Simon here. Simon is the one who initially gets Ralph to think about mankind's essential illness. Simon encourages Ralph to keep going in a moment of despair. I think you'll be okay. And Simon's death deeply affects Ralph in getting him and getting him to understand the truth and the truth of their situation. And finally, write about the importance of two of the following characters in Lord of the Flies: Ralph and Jack, Simon and Roger, the twins, Little and Squire, etc. For this one, I did Ralph, and I just did a quick notes for the four main characters. So the importance of Ralph is democracy, leadership, balance, order, and innocence lost. Jack is autocracy, atavism, the darkness of man's heart. Piggy is intelligence, order, femininity, and sanity. And Simon is the superego, pious, higher state of being, and the truth. Simon is the truth, and that's really important for him. So that was just some quick examples of what I do for essay questions on Lord of the Flies. Does anyone have any questions before we leave? Because if not, that'll be the end of this stream, and I'll thank everyone for coming. Pious means someone who is very good and very just pure and does everything good and always acts good, that kind of idea. If no one else has any questions, I think I'll end the stream here so I can edit together all the clips and put it on YouTube for people. Thank you, Lucy. Once again, for anyone watching on YouTube, there are actually comments coming up. I'm not crazy. Well, since no one's begging me to any questions, so this will be the end of the live stream. Thank you so much for anyone who joined me, or thank you to anyone who's watching on YouTube. I hope this really helped anyone, and thank you for joining me. Bye.